Hey, what's up, everybody? This is A.L. Johnson with Elevated Men, and I got a couple of my brothers with me as always. We're getting ready to have a very deep conversation about manhood. The question today is, have black men failed the community? And if so, when did it start and how can we change it? And so stay tuned because this is going to be a great conversation and we definitely want your input. We're about to get this started right now. So, like we said, have black men failed the community? We're getting ready to have this great conversation, but before we do that, I want to introduce you to my brothers. If this is your first time seeing us, to my to my right, I got the fit pastor, Mike Patton. How you doing, brother?
Hey, how you doing, my brother? Good to see you. Good hearing from you. Glad to be here.
Awesome, awesome. And to the far right, the vice president of Elevating Men, Mr. Lauren Jones, aka Lojo Speaks. How you doing, brother? Oh, you're muted.
Happy Sunday, the day before Labor Day. Labor Day. So y'all get an extra day to chill. Is basically
Yeah.
what it is, man. For some of y'all, some of us will still be working tomorrow. So
There you go. There you go. Man, y'all got plans? Look, y'all throwing something on the grill? What's going on?
I'm always welcome to be invited over to somebody's grill.
I feel you. I feel you. Yeah, I think I'm gonna throw a little bit of chicken on the grill or something. Something. I'm gonna do a little something. But so we had this show on our radio show. It was this past Friday, and we talked about where did this whole trouble with man start? And so we went all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Like we hopped in the whole time machine, went back to the Garden of Eden, and we were trying to figure it out and sort it out. And so we started with a little bit of a theory that in the Garden of Eden story, there's a lot to be taken from that. So in the beginning, Adam and Eve, they were in the garden. God told them not to eat the fruit of this tree. At some point, a serpent slithered up to Eve. He said, "Hey, eat this fruit that God told you not to." She ate it. Nothing happened. She shares the fruit with Adam. And for lack of a better word, all hell breaks loose, right? That's where the curses came in, the punishment. And so according to my text, and I'm not a theologian, and so correct me if I'm wrong, that's why we got the fit pastor here to make sure we got this historically correct. But God's walking through the garden. He realizes that something is wrong. Adam and Eve are hiding. They put fig leaves. They're trying to cover themselves, and they never had to do that before. And so the question arises, where did Adam go wrong? And so our brother Boykin, he's not on now. He may hop on later. We'll see how that goes. But he pointed out that, hey, where was Adam for this serpent to be able to come and tempt her to do wrong? Where was he at? He wasn't doing his job as far as covering or protecting her. And then we got to a point of, God saying, Adam, how did this happen? And Adam shifted the blame to the woman. And so there's a little bit of a theory that we have here that really since the beginning of time, that has been man's downfall, failing to cover the women in our lives and failing to take responsibility for our actions. And so here we are today, fast forward and we have problems all over our community. Here at Elevated Men, we believe that everything starts with the man. So we're really big on male accountability. This may be a little different for you. If you go to our YouTube channel, this isn't a man complaining channel. This is a male accountability channel. And so we're always looking at what can we do better? What can we change? And how can we really uplift our families and our communities? And so just kind of picking up where we left off on the radio show. And for those of you that don't know about it, if you go to kprt.com, that's 1590 AM and 106.1 FM in Kansas City, you can catch us Friday mornings from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. So that's the shameless plug. But let's get it started. So, Brother Patton, give us a little bit of context here, because in the show you mentioned something that I think is worth recapping. And so you said that in the 60s, there came a point where the government came in and really tore the black family apart. Lauren and I, we got a couple gray hairs, but not enough. We weren't there, so we need a little bit of context. We hear these things all the time, and I feel like sometimes it gets glossed over, and just kind of like immediately we just start nodding our heads. But let's really get into where this all started. And so, can you just share with us, what did the Black community, the Black household, the Black family look like, say in the 50s and 60s? When did it tear apart, in your opinion? And what was the catalyst?
Well, first of all, I don't think that it really started in the 60s. 1619 is when it really started, when we were taken from the motherland and we were taking on the Ninos and the Pintos, and we had over 12.5 million that were taken along with the transatlantic trade. And it was such an overflow that now you have the ocean area, the biggest graveyard that there is in the Mediterranean. And then now we were brought over here, and doing the fact of now having 12.5 million to be brought over here, you only had about 10 million. So about 2.5 million now approximately are now in the grave in the sea at the bottom of the ocean. And our forefathers and people that we knew and that we didn't know, that we could have known, was now brought apart now by a point now going to North America, going up to the upper parts of now what we call the United States that was not united. And then from that point, we were broken from the slave master. We were broken from the cotton yards and from the fruit vines and all these other different types of things. And so from that point, now when we go up to the 50s, we have to understand that there was the 40s and there was the 30s and there was the 20s. There was Jim Crow and there was the anti-abolitionists that started after. Now we find in 1862, I think it was, that we were really free, but we didn't know it until 1865. And it was done by Abraham Lincoln, that we believe by the different commentaries that he wasn't really for us. It was a point now of building up this nation, getting his name in front, using slaves as those that were on now the battlefield in the Civil War. And so from 1867 to 1877, we have this whole point now of them wanting to maintain slavery in the South, which didn't happen. A whole lot of our Black folks lost their lives, and we lost our identity. Even with the point of losing our identity, now let's just speed forward and let's go to the 50s and go to the 60s. We were supposed to give the inalienable right now for the pursuit of happiness that wasn't given to us. And it was supposed to be one nation under God, individual, with liberty and justice for all. All did not include us. So coming up in my particular area in the 60s, it was tough because we were doing all the things that we were supposed to do, but somewhere at this point of Juneteenth, now we have flourishing businesses, and we were to be as equal at one time economically, but now over 400 types of businesses were broken down by bombs and by fire and by killings along the way. Baseball sports had been now in operation. We didn't see us in it until another 100 years. It took another 100 years later in 1965, 64 to have our civil rights and have the right to vote, but yet we still paid our taxes. We saw things shift because I was saying to you that we had to interrupt situations that were immoral, reprehensible, like the bus. See, we were paying our taxes, buses going through our neighborhood in New York and Detroit and other places up in the East and the South, and we still could not sit where we wanted to. And so this whole situation dealing with Rosa Parks is that we protested and we interrupted and we tapped into the money resource. You follow the money, you'll find oftentimes where the problem is. And so now here's a situation where the civil rights movement starts in 1955 dealing with Emmett Till. And Emmett Till gets bludgeoned, put up under a fan, and just body just obliterated. And to the point where the mortuary person, says, look, to his mother, don't show this guy's body. Don't show your son's body. You won't recognize this. He says, no, I want America. I want the world to see what racism and bigotry and hatred can do. So
So,
that's
so let me ask you this. Let me interject here. So, from your point of view, would you say that racism is the main catalyst for what some people could say is the failure of the black man today in 2021?
I would say today, and I was giving you history just to bring you up to this point.
Oh
You
yeah,
have
definitely.
generational hate, generational pride of having land and ownership and capitalism. It's a fear to a lot of our Caucasian brothers and sisters because they don't want to lose what they feel they have been bequeathed by their forefathers. And so even today, you will now find those that now in the mainstream, especially in the Republican area, and don't forget about those that are Democrat too. We see the Archie Bunkers that are still alive today. So yes, I think it has a whole lot to do with it. Now, are things better? No, but things can be better, but they can't be at their best until we start, like I said, interrupting situations of the mainstream, of the normal culture in which we live right now. It has to be interrupted.
Absolutely. So, Lauren, from your perspective, we're the same age. We're the same age, so we've kind of seen the same things. Now, we had a conversation before, and a lot of times when we talk to, the senior members of our community, the brothers who have a little more wisdom than us, generally they will point back to the era of the 50s and 60s to say that the black family was stronger, more connected. Our communities were more connected. And what are your thoughts on that? What do you feel broke down between their generation and our generation, or do you even consider that to be true?
It's interesting because I know you and I had a conversation, and a lot of what we were saying was, if the breakdown started in the 60s, how did we get so far off? Like, were families truly that connected, especially when we hear stories about uh you know fathers having the main family and then having other kids. It sounds like that was going on back then too, so it sounds like there was some level of brokenness before that. And so, now I know if you fast forward, obviously you had Section 8 and food stamps that came into play where, a woman would get certain benefits if the man was removed from the home or not a part or not an active part of the family. You fast forward into the 80s where the crack era came in, and that, did lead to some destruction. Then you fast forward to the 90s, you had the Clinton administration, and a lot of the that was a time where
Massive
a lot of prisons, came to be.
massive incarceration.
Yeah, and so you can definitely see there was a pattern for sure. Where the breakdown came into play, I think Mike alluded to it perfectly, where you have to go back to where a majority of black people were just brought to America. Because if you talk about slavery, the father was a breeder. The only time he really came home is when what I'm saying, he brought a little bit home for the family. They made another baby, and then he got pulled back out. He was sent further away. In some cases further away. If they noticed that there was a certain family dynamic that was strong and dad was too close, then they just sent him even further away. So it was either harder for him to come back, or at that point you never saw him again.
Wow.
And so they've really taken the black man and just almost made him into a machine in a lot of cases. He's a machine, a robot, where he has pretty much the sole purpose of reproducing, but not being there to see. Well, we'll use the terminologies we always use. He's been there to plant a seed, but not see that seed really come to fruition. He's not able to, uh, correctly protect that seed and nourish that seed. It's somebody else doing it, whether it's mama, big mama, whether it's master, whoever the case may be. It was never dad. So and again, we can do a lot of things with history. It's hard because we weren't there, and those stories weren't necessarily passed down. And I think you can pass down the story verbally, but when it's translated by the next person, the story may change
Right, right.
because some of the details may get lost, or maybe they're just told the wrong way. And so I think it's super important for us to look at things like this and say, no, our history, our legacy has to be recorded. It has to be notated in some capacity to where it can never be destroyed. Because when you lose important pieces of history within, a culture or even just a family lineage, you lose so much that you don't know where you left off in order to be able to pick up.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's look at it from a different angle a little bit. So I'm not sure if you guys have heard the story of the elephant, but essentially a baby elephant, if you tie it to a twig, right, and it can't break it, it can't move away from it. Once it becomes an adult and it's hundreds of pounds, it still will stay tied to that stake. It won't realize that it can break free and do whatever it wants to do. And so my question for either of you could jump in. How much of it do you feel is that plays into our culture and the mentality and mindset of them? Because historically we have been held back. There are undeniable situations that have put roadblocks and hurdles in our way. Are some of those removed? And have we not realized that we can move and act a little differently when it comes to shaping our community and our households? The reason I asked that, there was a statistic that I was reading that said Black families, as far as the marriage rate, was much higher in the 50s and the 60s. Now, you alluded to something in the beginning, which is also true. That was when the Temptations were saying Papa was a Rolling Stone. And so there's a little bit of a mixed message there. And I'm kind of really trying to figure out where we got off track. And are we putting imaginary roadblocks in our way now, today in 2021? Mike, what's your thought on that?
Well, let's go back to the Temptations. Papa was a Rolling Stone. I think that was a point where now you had a lot of kids that grew up with that Papa that was a Rolling Stone really upset that wherever he laid his lad, he left his home. And when he died, all he left us was alone. And so I think this was something through music, and during that time of the 50s and 60s, we were able to express ourselves, like Marvin Gaye said, what's going on after World War II, and then after Vietnam War, what's going on. But, this whole point of where we stand and where we are, and I hope that I'm guiding this the right way, is that we deal a lot with his story and not true history. History tells one thing, but we have to understand during that time, the church was the greatest meeting place that we had at that time. And we had nothing more than a conservative way in our Black culture as to how we saw now ourselves engaging and enjoining into a desolate, a very just shattered, to be shattered place that was supposed to be a democracy and a republic. And so now here comes 1980, cable TV, and so it becomes liberal. And so now more people, you have the LGBTQIA and all those that were now a part of that movement. And then you had the Nation of Islam. You have all these different people. So what do you see? You see a point of division. But in the 50s and the 60s, we had almost more Black men in church than we had our women. Now it's more women by far than it is Black men. And one more thing.
Okay, so let's stop there. Let's pause there for a second. Let's pause there because I think that's a really solid point. So when the Black community was stronger, what you're saying is our church attendance rates were higher, so we had a stronger spiritual foundation. So that's a good starting point. When we talk about the welfare system, because I want to be really specific in my question here. When we talk about the welfare system, what I hear repetitively is that when at some point government said, if your man is in the house, you don't qualify for any government assistance. Is that correct?
Well, the subsidies in that came from World War II. Okay, then it went into the Johnson administration under HUD in 1968 as an amendment or something gratifying that he gave for the killing of Dr. King. And see, what happens is this. Let me give you facts now. I go to my neighborhood, right? My parents bought our home for $13,500 in 1955, which was all white. Blacks moved in. Now that house is worth almost $400,000. It looks no different than you would find a little shanty over the side of the road somewhere on Prospect. Now, they got some good houses. I'm talking about the shanties, right? But what happens is that when you don't own it, you don't take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
Compton just looks raggedy in so many areas because they get Section 8, they get HUD, they get all these subsidies. And now what happens is that the woman who now has these babies, and the more babies she has, the more government subsidies she has. So why go to work when I can have more babies and I don't have to work? And then who takes care of my lawn? Who takes care of the paint? The house I grew up, man, I was ashamed to show anybody where I grew up because they did that. They got it through a subsidy. They got it through a government assistance program in which they don't own the home because they can't afford the taxes. They can't afford now the payment. So the government helps them, but the government leaves them. But the mindset of the man now doesn't have that point of taking care of, because now you got young brothers that are coming up now, not knowing how to cut a line, not knowing the importance of a neighborhood being the way that it should be. And let's just say just one more thing. And then we still have that slave mentality. Why in this day and time are we still eating chitlins and eating pork and putting in fried food, jacking up our health? 92% of African-American women are more susceptible to having high blood pressure and hypertension and chronic heart failure than any other culture. And we only make up 13% of the population. So it's the mentality. It's like that elephant against that tree. We can break out from this. But when I got 8 kids, 7 kids at home, I'm going to go to Church's Chicken and get me a bucket of chicken, or go to KFC and get me a bucket of chicken, man, for $10, and I can feed everybody so they fed.
I understand that. I definitely understand that, man. Locho, what are your thoughts when you hear all this? So, again, the 50s and the 60s, we've been told that the government pushed the man out of the house. So the question that I'm really posing is, I don't believe that the government came to people's doors and said, hey, this man has to leave. And if it were incentivized through government assistance, what was going on, from a job perspective? Was it a situation where Black men just didn't have the ability to make the income to support the household? And so the government programs were so needed in that way? There's a missing piece here that I feel we never really talk about. What are your thoughts, Lojo?
So I think when you talk about government incentives and how attractive that they are, when you talk about the attractions, I don't really have to work for it. In theory, I don't have to work for it. Somebody else has to do the work, but I don't have to do it. And so when you look at jobs just in general, right? I mean, look at affirmative action. Affirmative action will tell you a lot about the disparity of employment as it related to not just Black men, but people of color in general at that time, which is why it was created to try to kind of close that gap.
Right.
And so we've always been at a disadvantage when it comes to high paying jobs. Because in the normal corporate field, not because we didn't have the skill and the ability, just simply because of the color of our skin, we were looked at as being lesser off, and so it was like, there's no way he could run this Fortune 500 company. Black people just aren't that smart. That is, that was and really still is in some cases a reality. In a lot of ways. I love what Brother Boykin does. And he is when you're zigging, he's zagging, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we're saying why, he's saying why not?
Right.
Having more of a optimistic view of things. And when you think about, you go back to the 60s and you talk about, our black leaders of the time, right? You had Martin Luther King, you had Malcolm X. Those were our two most known prominent figures, right? Uh, when they took them out, I think that just put a fear into just black people in general. Like if they gonna take our leaders out, they can take anybody out, and I think that made us so fearful that in some ways we stopped fighting and we started to say, all right, I'm going to retreat, I'm going to give in a little bit. And that's when the government was able to come in and take that mentality and say, okay, now let's create this stronghold. Let's create things like Section 8. Let's go ahead and bring crack cocaine into the black community and do more destruction because they're weak now. They're weak now. We got them on the ropes. So let's go ahead and start to put things in place that can go ahead and provide that knockout punch, And you fast forward to now, and it's very, very interesting because, a lot of the youngest generation, they lack one thing, and that's discipline, right? They lack a lot of discipline. You see more successful black people in general now. I really do feel that way just because we've really tapped into just entertainment. We're taking our income through sports. Then some of us are trying to use that to catapult us into that next stratosphere and that next level. So you do see more successful black people now, but you don't see that discipline that's going to say, okay, I am going to wait this out because this is the goal, and I'm not going to settle for anything less than that goal. You look at Byron Allen and what he's doing through the court system, just from a media perspective, and they've offered him deal after deal after deal, and he's like, nope, that's not what I came here for. So if I got to fight this fight for 10, 15, 20 years to get everything I came here to get, then I'll wait. Most of us will say, you know what? I came for 20 million, but they're offering me 2.5. I take the 2.5. That's cool. We don't have that discipline to wait, to hold on. We could be, and a lot of it is because we don't know how to leverage and utilize our resources to wait. And so we feel like we have to take that buyout in order to try to get to the next step. And really the buyout, we lose all leverage and all control over whatever we came to fight in the first place.
That makes sense. Now, see, here's my thing. I hear two things from what the both of you are saying. One, at some point, black men lost their spirit. Whether it was through racism and different laws that made us feel like we can't be as successful as our white brothers and sisters. We can't walk into the same spaces. We can't enjoy the same fruits of our labor. And so I see that portion of it. The other thing that I see is that our black women have never felt secure enough in the ability of black men to support a family, not necessarily because we aren't good enough to do so, but because the circumstances and situations didn't allow it. And so when the government comes in and says, hey, I can actually provide you security in the form of a Section 8 voucher, I can provide you food security in the form of food stamps, etc. The only thing is you have to get rid of that man. It kind of makes sense now because it's like, well, hey, if you look at generational, from slavery, he wasn't able to provide for the family. It was the slave master. It was the slave owner who was more or less giving that provision. And then you move forward. Now you have the government giving the provision. I see how that works. Now, if we fast forward to now, what do you feel is affecting the mindset of men who are not really being the heads of families in the way that they should? Do you believe that now, still today, it's a generational effect, or do you think that we're just complacent?
I think it's a combination of both, right? I think it just depends on kind of who you're talking to. I think the complacency comes in for those that just come from a generational broken homes, right? My daddy didn't, so why should I? And then his daddy probably said the same thing, and so on and so forth. And so you do have this mentality that I need to see it to believe it, and I haven't seen it, therefore I don't believe it. And then I think the other side of it, and I think it's kind of always been like this, is education. I think the way in which we're educated, right? You have an insurance company, but you just don't talk about insurance. You talk about financial literacy and how we can be financially literate. How many of us are truly getting that? We're sending our kids to school and they learning Pythagorean theorem and they'll never use it in their adult life. But they couldn't tell you how to balance a checkbook. But here's where it gets tricky is if we know that our kids aren't getting the true education that they need to get, why aren't we creating other systems to provide that for them? Why are we not going to showing up strong arm at the school board meeting saying, hey, we need to change this curriculum? Why are we not going to the state capitol where you have the state educators that are really creating all these curriculums and things like that, and it's just being passed down? Why are we not showing up in numbers there to say, wait a minute, y'all teaching this that they'll never learn, but you're unwilling to teach this here that they use every single day?
Right. Absolutely.
That's where the fight is always up here, right? The mind tells the body what to do. We don't take a step unless our brain tells us to take a step. We don't realize it because we just take steps all the time, but that's our brain sending those electrodes to our legs saying, hey, you got to move, right? Everything starts in our minds. And, when you are mentally unwilling, I won't use incapable because I feel like every single human is capable of whatever, but unwilling to do the things that are necessary in order to further things along, then essentially we just become a part of the problem. We're not a part of the solution. We are actually just perpetuating a problem just in a different way.
Because I still feel like it comes back to the elephant tied to the state, right? Yes, we do definitely need to hold our school board accountable because the curriculum is subpar. We all know that. No Child Left Behind, all that. Our kids aren't learning anything. But at the same time, we do have to look at our own personal responsibility as parents. And so we have to find ways to make sure that we do impart that knowledge, where the school system doesn't. So we have to kind of fill in that gap. Maybe we shouldn't have to, but because we know, we have to pivot and we have to make those changes ourselves, just like when it comes down to screen time for children, right? All of them have the greatest library that was ever created right in the palm of their hand, but how are they using it? Is it just video games and searching meaningless things, or are we encouraging them to take that and use it for really what it's for, to gain additional knowledge, because knowledge is power, and that'll allow them, better opportunities in life. Now, Mike, I've got a question for you and I'll get back to you, Law. I see you have something, but this is my question here. Are we confused as a community? We have this conversation a lot, not just on our platform. I'm hearing it, everywhere, that government programs tore apart the Black family, right? But to this day, we still lobby to keep those same programs in place. Now, I'm not saying that they aren't needed in certain situations, but my question is if those programs were removed, hypothetically, I know it would be a rough time at first, but do you think that those are our crutch? And if they were removed, do you think that things will be positive or more negative if we remove those social safety nets that we say tore the family apart?
Well, and that's a great question. But here is again that my brother was saying, dealing with the mind and stepping out on something that you have not been used to. And so many Black folks have been connected to handouts, and handouts have been given.
You're a popular brother tonight. I see you got something going on this evening, don't you?
So I don't know what's going on with this thing.
Hey, but the music was so epic, though.
Right. Got the whole orchestra behind you over there.
But what happens is this. is that really and truly, this is not my fight. This is you brother's fight. Because now, let's take where we are right now. You understand the didactic outline of how all this thing is working so far as the language and the mentality. I'm kind of far 30-year removed from where you are right now. But what I do say, there's a word called intestinal fortitude. Intestinal fortitude is a person that has the courage to endure the journey. So why don't we have more African American in the Republican conservative realm to represent us now, so that we can be a part of moving something more towards our agenda from the far right than everybody staying on the far left, voting in the same persons and the same mayors and the same representatives, the same senators that have kept us in a low suppression point because of perception. And the reason why a lot of times they want to go through this whole matter of now giving is so that they can now be in a situation where they can be reelected. So it becomes political. And so now we need voices like Lojo, like yourself, speaking, going the distance. Look, guys, this is where we need to do. This is how we meet this in the middle of the road. Now, we have to educate people on the political piece. But see, we're trying to get now how to get me a job past minimum wage. Mm-hmm. So right now, what's happening over in Afghanistan and what's happening over these other, that's not my concern. I'm trying to get past minimum wage. How do I get to the next level? Well, education is the key. I think that every single person coming out of, this is my belief now, that comes out of high school ought to go to an HBC school to learn about your progress and the point now that your purpose has a priority. And I think it has to start from the ground up. And if the house can't teach it, I think the school systems ought to be involved in it. Am I my brother's keeper? You're right. Yes, I am. But I can't be in a situation where Jesus said this, I came into my own and my own received me not. I go into my own black neighborhood and they treat me like I'm an outsider. Look at what the rap artists are calling these women. So in their mind, that's what and how they look at their black men. So we got to change the rhetoric. We got to change the vocabulary, the mindset, but that's hard to do. But what we do, we take one step at a time. And you brothers right here, you guys are doing a fantastic job. Now, I'm nothing more than an old file cabinet. Now, can I go? I can go right along with you, but I don't know the language. I'm not at that point. Because see, when Dr. King was coming up and Malcolm X and Medgar Evers, those guys were in the same age of those that were moving at the time. They were in their 30s. They were in their 20s. You guys are in your 30s. You guys are still babies, carrying babies along the way. But what happens with a baby is that you feed them. When you hear them cry, you go see about them. You pamper them, but you educate them not to be pampered, but now how to stand on their own 2 feet. That's what this elevating men is all about. How to stand on your 2 feet. Well, sometimes when people are disfigured, you got to give them a crutch and give them a what they call those baby toddlers until they're able to grow and keep pushing them and keep pushing them and keep pushing them. That's what this is about. That's what you all are doing. You guys have the mindset to connect in an era that I'm just sitting back, okay, let me support and let me see what I can do now to be an asset instead of a liability. That's where our black men need to be. What is an asset? What is a liability? So once we define that and put that out, then we start looking at the outline of now, how do I make the assets greater than the liability?
Thank you. Lojo, I saw your eyes perk up when he mentioned the political part. What came to mind for you?
So I agree. As far as we need to learn how to leverage politics to our advantage. And there, Mike, you made a statement that is it's such a tough phrase, and it's called the Black Agenda. And when you talk about the Black Agenda, what is the Black Agenda? I think is the biggest problem. That's why we can't get on one accord to go to the government and say, hey, this is what we asking for, you know, because we haven't figured out what the black agenda is. And so, you know, how do you go and sit before a governing body and say, hey, this is what we're asking for, when they can go right behind your back and go to the next person and be like, so is this what you're asking for? And then they like, well, kind of, but no, not really. You know, that's not exactly what.
That's that point right there. That is a very strong point, because that goes back to the original question. So we say, you know, hey, these programs hurt our community and incentivized us not to have fathers in the home. So now we have broken families and broken communities.
Mhm.
And like you said, we don't have a black agenda. And so when they come to us and they say, well, hey, what do you want? We're in office. We got power now. There's a portion of the community that says, well, hey, we don't really need the government assistance in the form of food stamps and Section 8 and things like that. We need, you know, business loans, micro grants, you know, funding for infrastructure. These are the things that we need. But then you have a portion that's saying, no, we need more incentives such as Section 8 food stamps. We need that to expand. Right.
Yeah.
And so, we really don't have an agenda. We
and
don't.
I'm glad you said something, Mike. Hold on, Mike. I'm glad you used the analogy to describe something, because I was getting ready to fight you for a second when you said that I'm an old man and I'm just back here trying to guide, but you used a very important phrase that for our generation is super important. And you said we are file cabinets of knowledge. We are file cabinets. And I'm like, okay, now I don't have to fight him anymore, because at least he's saying, okay, this is what I have to offer. Because I believe that your generation has a lot to offer our generation of black men. And it's how do we get there? Because I know Brother Boykin, when we were on the show on Friday, he was like, our generation, your generation are disconnected. And that's the problem. We're disconnected. And I know when you go back to one of our original shows, one of the statements that was made is, if you speak Greek and they speak French, then you need to learn French in order to teach them Greek.
Right.
And that takes time, that takes effort. And I think maybe that's a lot of where the disconnect comes in right there, is the effort and the time that it takes. And, you know, when I sit down with you as a senior statesman and say, okay, what is our agenda? What is our goal here? Because if we just talking to be talking, I got something else I could probably be doing. But if there's a goal and agenda that we're going to be discussing that moves us to that next level, let's figure out what that is right here, right now, so that we're on the same page. That you're not just talking to me to be talking, but you're talking to me with a purpose. And I know that you're talking to me with a purpose. It's not just us having dialogue just to be having it, because at the end of the day, actions speak louder than words. So if all we doing is sitting here talking, I have better things to do with my time. But if we're talking because, hey, we're getting ready to take this conversation and we're getting ready to become change agents in our communities, all right, man, let's sit down. I'll buy coffee this weekend, you know, so that we can stay up and sit up as long as we need to in order to make this happen. Because I know when my grandfather was around, I remember him going to work all day, coming home, checking in with the family, and then he had to slip out at like 10, 11 o'clock at night. And that's when the meeting of the minds was really going on, from 11 to 3. And they were kind of figuring out things that they needed to do to improve the community as it stood in that moment. And I think that is what we lost. We lost that right there, where we had that energy to say, you know, we got to make things better. And if we working all day, then guess what? We're going to go home. We're going to check on the family, make sure everybody's good. And then we're going to sneak away in the corner for a few hours. And we're going to come up with the next master plan to mastermind this next move.
Mike?
If I could address this point of agenda. Back in 1960, John Fitzgerald Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I say that sets the tone. Ask not what this country can do for you, but what you can do for your family. I think the very first thing is that in our agenda, what constitutes, what defines a family? It's not what the country or the city can do for my family. What does my family need? Until I'm able to understand what constitutes and outlines a family, I will never then understand what my family needs. In the 50s and the 60s, as I was asked, family had a definition. Family had a purpose. We only knew what we saw around us from our church and our fraternal and sorority organizations that were around us in our neighborhood, our blocks. We knew what we had to stand for. We knew what we had to stand for so far as a father working, a mother co-parenting or working and parenting too, and a father co-parenting and working to bring in economics, making sure that the child is coming home, making sure that they're taken care of. Yes, there were some mishaps, but I think during that time that the family was defined. In this time, I don't think many people of us understand the definition of family. They don't understand the outline and the directive narrative as to now what my family needs. Until that happens, I think that there's going to be always a discourse, that's going to be a division. Let's define the first agenda is now, what is family and what does my family need? What part of my family now am I a part of or should be a part of to make my nation better? Now, some people don't care about the nation. Some people don't care about, and so what is he saying in the Bible? When they reject you, sweep the dust from your feet and move on to the next. Somebody is going to get it. So what do? We're seed planters. And whenever you plant that seed, you don't know when it's going to come up to bear fruit, as long as you keep watering it and it gets sunlight from now things that are around us now to nurture it. And then when it comes, it comes. But we will never grow unless we plant something in the ground, in a mind that can now take what it is. And it won't be everybody. But if I can at least, before I die, if I can at least help somebody, then my living won't be in vain.
See, and that's why I love, what we do here at Elevated Men. One of the projects that we've been doing offline is starting to go into the schools and, talking to these young children, these young boys, and giving them some life games, some things to consider before they reach adulthood. Because I think one of the main problems as well is young men today, I would say anyone from 20 to 40, there's a high probability that they've never really seen male responsibility. They haven't seen male accountability. And so when you have a generation who was raised by women who've done an excellent job, but really follow me on this, strong women who are able to hold things down, whether it be through government programs or going and working 12-hour shifts, and however they did it, they made it happen. And I believe that there's a certain amount of anger that Black women feel, not all, but some. I think there's a certain amount of betrayal that Black women feel. And so when they're raising this young man without the assistance of the father, that young man is growing up hearing things like, I don't need a man. Mama got you. We're going to take care of this. Everything's going to be all right. And when he looks at his aunties and he looks at the other women in his family and he sees that, well, wait a minute, we are eating. I got clothes on my back. I got shoes on my feet. And they said, we don't need a man. And all of these things still happen. And there isn't that context. And so kind of like Lojo said, that's why we need our senior statesmen to be a part of this project, because we need that historical context to make it all make sense, to really bring it full circle.
What's interesting when you say that is, as young boys coming up, being raised by our mothers, we hear those statements, right? Well, what we don't connect until we get a little bit older and we become men is, wait a minute, you was talking about me, so you don't need me.
Right.
All this time I'm coming up like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Mama got me. I don't need no man. And then you grow up, you're like, I'm a man. Whoa, wait a minute.
Exactly.
So now what? Now, and that's where you really start to get off on the wrong path. Because you're like, well, if I'm not needed, then I guess I'll just float wherever.
And then what do a lot of women say? A lot of women say that the men now are really just old boys. You hear a lot of women say, you go on social media, what's the main conversation? I ain't taking care of no man. When did that ever become a thing? Like, when did that even start? The idea of, I need to take care of a man. As a woman, I need to take care of this man. I'm not about to have no man sleeping on my couch. Where did that even come from? Because if we as men were standing and doing our God-given duties, that would never even be a conversation. That would never be a conversation. Mike, you have something to say?
No, I'm agreeing right with you. Again, as I said before in our last podcast, a lot of this has to do with perception, it has to do with subliminal seduction. You know, the media and what we see on TV perpetuates and brings out what you just brought out. You know, and a woman just says, like the show said, I could do bad all by myself. I don't need a man, but you just get anybody so that you can have somebody, so that you want to have to be by yourself. And so you get people that are irresponsible. And you know, the whole point again has to do with defining family. I think we ought to just talk about what defines a family, and then what does a family need. I think that ought to be the topic of a conversation.
Let's go there. One of our other brothers just brought up Drew Boykin. Can you hear us? I think you may be froze up a little bit. If you can hear us, say something when you can. Hey, what's going on, bro?
I think I have connection, so I'm now.
Okay. Not a problem at all. So where we're at in the conversation now, can you state that question again, Mike?
I think one of the main topics that we ought to really discuss is, what is a family? What makes up a family? Then when we define that to some degree, I have dialogue with it in the discussion. What does my family need when I make one?
So simple definition, and I see why you say that, because the simple definition is a man, woman, and child. But where we are in society today, it appears that they're trying to reframe what family is and say that it doesn't necessarily have to be a man involved. It can be, you know, whatever. It could be whatever.
What happens with this? I can have my hand, right? And my hand can have muscles and fingers. But if I have no nerve or neuron to make these move, then my hand means nothing. All I have is an anatomy or anatomical construct that has no movement. That's what I'm saying. Just because you have the pieces don't mean the pieces work.
Got it. So do you think that do gender roles, and that was a powerful statement. Do gender roles play into any of this? Lojo, I'll go to you on this. So we're saying, you know, what is a family and what does a family need? We say that a family is a man, woman, and child. And then when we get into what are the needs, do you feel that the change in gender roles over the last few decades has created a situation where men really don't know where they're needed? Or, you know, is that a miss? What are your thoughts?
No, I think that wow. Okay. Let me talk about relationships if we're gonna go here, right? You know, one of the most important thing you can have in any relationship, I don't care if it's, you know, husband, wife, best friend, whatever the case may be, is communication, right? And so it's important to communicate what the intent is, right? You know, so if you are, you know, engaged with a woman, since we're talking about a family, if you're engaged with a woman and, you know, you guys' intent is to create a family, then before you create that next level of lineage, then you need to have a conversation on what you guys' roles will be within the confines of that family. Because, you know, it's not especially in today's society where, you know, you have more women in the workforce and women working and things of that nature. You know, a woman just being, you know, June Cleaver, that I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It's just not as common. And that's why it's important to have the conversation, because you do have some women that are like, yeah, I'm good being the housemaker, keeping the house clean, providing meals for the family and things like that, and just having what we consider to be the traditional family as it relates to husband and wife, male and female. Whereas today, and then you have the other side where the woman is like, no, I want to be in the workforce and I want to be able to, show that, I'm intelligent, and mentally capable and physically capable of doing the same or similar work that we've seen our men traditionally do over the course of, many centuries. And so you have to define that within the two individuals. Because I've seen a lot of times where you may have a house dad or whatever, and he's the one that, plays more of the, homemaker role and things of that nature. And then somebody's like, oh, that's what you do. But if that's what those two individuals decided and it works and that family is strong, mind your business. Mind your business. It doesn't have anything to do with you, because if they are providing a greater good for the community, and the family is thriving, and then therefore the community is thriving, there's only one person in this whole entire universe that can judge any situation. That's God. It's not up to me to define what goes on in your home, and so I think that's where things can kind of get tricky. Now, what does that lead to? That leads to what we see today, which is where you have two women running a home, or you have two men running a home, and so there isn't that other species that is in the home, so to say, and again, me personally, only God can judge. All I can really do, I know you want to go somewhere. Only God can judge. Now, does that mean that I can't, or I'm not allowed to say anything? No, that's not what that means by any stretch of the imagination. But when we come in with such a judgmental attitude and mentality, that essentially pushes people away, and that minimizes and limits our power to connect.
Now,
And
while you're there, because
yeah,
this is on the same path, and this is for you, Lojo. Do you feel, because we're talking about grooming up the next generation of men, um, and I agree with you, to each his own as far as the household and the family dynamics. But my specific question is, do you think that anything is taken away from a young man who doesn't see his father as a provider? So if we say that that's the traditional role, do you think that anything is lost when a boy doesn't see the man in his household as a provider? When it
sure,
comes to, okay.
sure, without question, because then what you're doing is you're passing on a mentality that I'm not responsible to do anything, right? I
But
don't.
I mean, let's say like the responsibility is there. I may have worded that wrong. So say if the wife is the breadwinner
Yes.
and the husband is more of the homemaker,
Hmm.
which is perfectly fine. But do you think that takes away anything from a young boy who's trying to say, okay, well, I'm going to be a man one day. What are my roles? What are my responsibilities? Because that's what we're talking about. Does that change any dynamic in his mind, or are there ways that in a household that is ran like that, those values can still be instilled effectively?
Oh yeah, without question. And that's why it comes down to the mother and the father having that dialogue, right? And saying, you know, this is what our thing is. However, there are multiple ways to do this. It doesn't have to be mom being a breadwinner and dad being at home. It can be dad being a breadwinner, mom being at home, or maybe you guys just do everything together where y'all go to work from 8 to 5 when while the kids are out to school, and then we come home and which is a lot of what you're seeing now in a lot of cases is you're seeing, once the kids are of age, and sometimes it's even before they're in kindergarten, maybe it's preschool, that both parents are working. Everybody's gone and out the house by 8:30, 9 o'clock. The parents work. Everybody comes home. They do the family thing, and so I think that conversation has to be had to say, hey, just because this is the structure and how we do it, it doesn't necessarily mean that my kids have to do the exact same thing, because in most cases they don't. In most cases, there's some type of alteration in some capacity But as long as the core values stay intact and in line, then I mean, I feel like that's all that's important is those core values. You know, how people do things. I mean, we all do things differently. You know, you may say, I don't want my kids listening to hip hop. And I may say, man, what's the big deal? You know what I'm saying? We have conversations about what they listening to. And they in some cases they end up to the same place. Whether or not you didn't let them listen to it and I did, a lot of times they end up in the same place. And
Right.
so if they end up in that same place, it's probably because you just didn't let them listen to it. And so you protected them in one way. I let them listen to it, but we had conversations about what they were taking in. And in some cases, I probably had to do the same thing you did, which was, ooh, but that song there,
Right.
you can't listen. You can't listen to WAP. You know what I'm saying? You can listen to Brenda Had a Baby, but I'm not going to let you listen to WAP, you know?
So could it be that men really haven't failed? It's just here in the modern era, the roles and responsibilities have changed, and maybe we all haven't caught up to that fact. What's your thought?
I won't use the word change. I'll use the word evolved.
Okay, so if our roles have evolved, is it fair for us to say that men are failing the community currently based off of the old standard? Because now it brings in a different point of view, that if the standard was one way 40, 50 years ago and that's changed and we're still judging men by the old standard, are we being unfair? Or are men failing it? How do you view that, Mike?
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah.
See, for the believer, and I like to be transparent. I messed up in my life, running here, woman here, out in the wilderness without being guided, listening to what the Spirit is saying, but disobeying it. Okay. So let's just be transparent about this. And Lojo, you was talking about, well, whatever happens in your home, that's your thing, not judging. No, I'm not judging anything. Okay. I'm telling you what the Bible says. And what the Bible says is true. It can't be changed. Jesus said, God said, I'm the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. Ephesians 5:25 says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church. And Christ did not love the church with a condition, and that's us. He gave us grace and gave us mercy. In the home, there's a certain outline in the book of Genesis 2 that gives us now the institution in which now relationships and marriage is supposed to be, which was a shadow of what's to come now in the New Testament in this church age that we live right now. Husbands, we're supposed to love our wives, but it's hard to love your wife when you don't love yourself and you don't understand who loves you. When a person's been raped, when a person's been beaten, when a person's been in drugs, when a person's been in a situation where they've been incarcerated, in and out, how can you love yourself when you don't feel apart anything other than behind bars or behind some type of institution that's trying to correct your behavior, and you're paying for the price that now you have caused to put you in that situation because you had no role model. We have to teach love. Again, we have to define what is the definition of a family. And a family is not the good old boy that we see Leave It to Beaver. Okay, that is in a certain way. But I'm talking about from those people that come from the hood. And the reason why you call it hood, why? Because it's a stigma of subliminal seduction. When we look at hood, we look at black folk and we look at good times. When we look at hood, we look at people that came from the hood, and we look at the Jeffersons. But did you know all these people, none of them were graduates of high school. They had to pick up and now put in to keep what they had because of the moral compass. We've lowered the moral compass because we lowered the morality, and the points about us around us is so reprehensible that we can't even see out of this dark cloud that we're in. How do we move clouds? by moving our hand to separate where the cloud is so that we can see the light. We have to start loving ourselves. We have to tell our young brothers, man, I love you. Hug, man. It's going to be okay. Put in love, in which they probably don't have at home. They probably don't see in school. Teach to them about love. Teach them about the points of progression. And the thing about it is that, again, there's a whole lot of money in this, and all this other different type. Man, I don't understand the music. I don't even care, but I do care. I don't know one music right now, brother. I'm still on Confunction. I'm still on Parliament Funkadelic. I'm still on Marvin Gaye. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
I'm saying to you right now, and they're calling the B word and not even editing it on the radio. Back in the day, in our media, in our songs, we had a coalition in which now people would cut off and they wouldn't allow you to say. The Isaac brother says, fight the power, and they had the BS word in there. You didn't hear that BS word on the radio. You only get that on out. But then at home, parents would not allow their kids to listen to that. So now, let's talk about the family. Let's talk about the family. What defines the family?
And Lojo, I know you had something to say, and I want this to be tied into your response. Mike said that we need to define family, and I believe, simply put, man, woman, child. But when we define family, we have to define the role of a man, and it appears that we really don't have any defined roles as of today. And so, do you see that as a problem? Do you see that we need to find a definition for men that we all agree with, similar to the Black agenda? We don't have an agenda, so politicians don't really know what we want or need collectively. Does there need to be a new definition of a man that we all agree on? Is it interchangeable? And then what was your thought that you had while Mike was speaking?
So my thought really goes to that statement of evolution, right? Where you talked about, good times. You talked about the Jeffersons. Well, we grew up on, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and family, the Cosby Show, so families that had moved to a different, Black families that had moved to a different level. And so, that was encouragement for some of us to say, oh, wow. You know what I'm saying? My dad's a doctor, mom's a lawyer, Fresh Prince, even though I never knew, I don't think Aunt Viv ever really did anything, but we know that Uncle Phil, was a judge. And so, it gave us that barometer that there was more that we could accomplish, that we could sit in certain seats. And it's not to say that it wasn't there before, because we had our Thurgood Marshalls and stuff like that. We had our Colin Powells and, Black members like that. And so it's not that it never existed. We just saw it on TV, and TV is kind of where we were. That's a lot of times where we spent our family. And so I think you always have to look at, certain things and say, okay, is it time to redefine? And I don't always look at as redefining as completely changing, but more so looking at what may not be the same in its current state. When you think about a moral compasses don't normally change. Your value systems don't normally change. There may be some idiosyncrasies within those values and those morals that may evolve, but at their core, they're the same. I'm not going to go out here and say, oh, well, I don't believe that murder is wrong anymore. My core value says that murder is wrong in any capacity. But where it evolves is saying, well, shoot, man, if that guy was getting ready to stab that woman and, guy over here was just trying to defend the woman, so he choked the dude out and didn't realize that he killed him. Like, do I look at, I wouldn't look at that as something traditional where it's just pop, pop, bang, bang, because I'm mad at you. I'm going to look at that nuance and say, okay, well, he didn't. I know he killed him, but he killed him because he was trying to protect her. So I think there's nuance within a lot of what we discuss, but I feel like there is also a core where we say in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, because in the earth was without form, right? That's core right there. But now when you look at it, okay, well, we got some trees over there and we got bodies of water over here. So is the earth now has form to it. So with that form, something has to evolve because it's not in that same state anymore. It's in a different state. Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
I so appreciate what you're saying to that. If I can just connect this with this, I believe that the agenda, and we talk about the family, first starts with communication. I think that a man and or female ought to do three things. When you meet someone, there ought to be an FBI, a CIA check, and an autopsy on that person. We don't investigate now the persons that we're with before we now get into a point now of connecting with them in a way that would make a family. And I'm so focused on that because of the mistakes I made in my life. I'm able to now connect now with the person so that they are, if they're in their mistake, I can help them come out of their mistake piece by piece, or I can share with them in a situation where they don't have to make the mistake. Dr. Hosfield said this one thing. He says, you know what? Sometimes we run into situations, and I'm trying to be quick with this, is that we say experience is the best teacher. No, he says that's not necessarily true. He says, I believe sometimes good advice is the best teacher. Then there's a point of responsibility. Then there's a point of provision, and then there's prayer. We can't reinvent the wheel. As long as we keep now reinventing the wheel, we come up with an ideology, a social pathology of now these ideas that fit one way of the moral majority. And when you look at the Bible, it doesn't fit the majority of the people. It goes against the grain. But am I going against the grain, which is right? Or I'm going against now, and I'm sucking myself into a society now that agrees with me because that's a popular vote. I'll get a lot of likes on my Facebook. We have to stand for something or we'll fall for everything.
Facts. I agree, man. Lojo, you have something to say on that?
Would you, and I want to use this, I want to say this the right way. So would you consider education to be advice?
Education is substantive because it gives you information, but doesn't give you a revelation.
Okay.
See, there's one thing
so it's
of
like
having
knowledge
information.
without wisdom. Knowledge without wisdom.
Okay, you said I can leave it at that because
So
I can
good.
have all the information, but if there's no application, there's no revelation.
Okay. And the reason I ask is because we talk about like the family and stuff, you know, the nuclear family, whatever you want to word it. And I think to myself, and I only think I think about these things because of my experience in life, right? You know, I had my first kid when I was 16. You know, mom got pregnant when she was 15. And when I was in my early 20s and I'm actually learning about sex, I'm like, man, I didn't know any of this. Like, I didn't know anything that I learned in my 20s that may or may not, we don't know because the choices constantly, we don't know. But I would think I would have at least had more information to make a more educated decision that may not have put really me first, but then my kid in that situation. You know, I'm now a baby raising a baby, and then I think back, okay, well, when the school, which you know, who are they giving you the right information? Who knows? But when the school was trying, my mom was like, "No, I don't want the school teaching my kid about sex." But then my mom didn't had a conversation with me about sex, and my dad was, I don't know. And so it was like, man, I wish I would have gotten that information so maybe I could have made a better decision. And so I look at this generation and I'm like, okay, Well, are we just not giving them anything? And that's why they out here just doing whatever. And we sitting here and we shaking our heads like, oh my God, I don't know what's wrong with this generation. But we are unwilling to be like, hey, look, man, I ain't trying to say nothing. I'm not trying to get you riled up. But little man, you look sloppy with your pants down on your knees like that. Or are we just gonna continue to sit back and just shake our heads and be like, look at that?
Well, I think it's something that you say a lot, Lojo. It's because we never took control of the narrative, and so a lot of times, like, we can kind of blame media, and but we're ingesting it, and we're allowing our children to ingest it, and we're not giving them an alternative. And so, good men like us who have the knowledge, who have the understanding of community building and what needs to change, we have to be louder. We really have to drown out the noise, and there's a lot of noise that's being made. But if we don't come together and drown that out and point our children into the direction of the good noise, so to speak, the problem is just going to continue and continue, because the media machine isn't going to stop on our behalf. They're not going to take a break and say, well, hey, we're going to let y'all catch up so this is even, or whatever. And so it's really important for us to make sure that we're instilling those values in our own children, taking the responsibility for it, holding ourselves accountable. And it really doesn't go outside of the home. It's difficult to say that because, like you said before, Lojo, a lot of times both parents are working. They're gone from 9 to 5. The school has our children. When we come back, there's so many other things that need to be done. That then you have a point where, the tablet, the television, the cell phone is giving them the majority of their information. And so there, in some type of way, we really have to reshape that. Mike, you had a comment?
No, it was freezing.
I want to extend this to you, Mike. Just because you have something that I feel like we need, and you say we need it too, I think it's how we use it, right? But you said in the 60s, we had the church. That's what we had. It was tried and true. Everybody was in the church. It didn't matter if you was male, female, kid, adult, everybody was in the church. And I think that's the question that I'll consider myself to be a little bit wayward as it relates to just going to church, on a consistent basis and connecting with the body of Christ. I would consider myself to be wayward in that perspective. But I'm like, in my head, I'm like, but it's not that I don't want to be connected. I'm just so disconnected. I don't know exactly how to reconnect. And I look at the spiritual, I look at the religious aspect. I want to make sure I keep those separate, but I look at the religious aspect of the church, and I'm like, is that the problem? We've become too religious, that we in turn become too judgy, and that judgment comes across in a way that pushes people away. And so, and I'm not really posing a question, but I think I'm really asking, how do we open up the church to more than just church? How do we?
And I want to add, can I add to that question as well? Because I believe that's an important thing. My father was a pastor, before he passed away. And I remember us having a conversation about how the church was really the hub for everything. There were a lot of programs that our community centers, which are now funded through the government, provide, that actually the church provided. The church was really that meeting place for us to have the conversation. So when we say we don't have a Black agenda, prior to, when you look at Martin Luther King and in that era, the Black agenda was created in the church. So now we don't really have a meeting place because so many people have left the church. So it's kind of like, what are we doing? So what do you feel the church's role is in that?
Is that to me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, well, it's like this. See, from that, we had Jesse Jackson that took on Operation Push. And now we went from that. And so what happens is that the morality and the accountability now began to lose, because now we became more liberal and understand that we have to define this conversation, the difference between religion and relationship. See, there's one thing to have a religion, and then there's another thing to have a relationship. Religion is something that you do religiously. A relationship is something that you carry with you everywhere you go. And so when I talk to these young men and I speak to them, and I go out to different places, I try to now share with them what it is to have a relationship. But first of all, I have to be relatable to them and be willing to do so. I am willing now to share with these young men that are in my gym and the places now that I facilitate, and I show up and I'm asked questions, time spent to build a relationship to the one that is the most relatable. And I have to, till the day I die, teach and preach Jesus Christ. For God so loved this world. That means God so loved you. He has a relationship with you, so he wants you to have a relationship with him. Now, back in the 50s and 60s, you couldn't relate or have agendas made up in a club because you were drunk or you were trying to hit on a woman or a man. But inside of a church, yes, those things happen. Somebody would laugh and say, what happened to the church? No, but we had an agenda. It was a safe place. It was more than just mortar and clay. It was people that were family members, people that had children had been murdered, people that now that were living in cars and living out and did not have, the have and the have-nots, coming together, sharing something now that was profitable to change the agenda of now the laws of that time. What was powerful is that we came together to change the laws and now to bring about the moral scope of those that were now just discombobulated into their own point of bigotry and didn't know it, systemic racism and didn't know it. And still today, you have some people that say there isn't. And yes, there is today. However, we want to get into a point where there's a relationship, including everybody. We have this sign that says, Black Lives Matters. Well, yeah, all lives matters, but until Black lives aren't included, what matters, then no, all lives don't matter because Blacks have been excluded in that area. That's what we see on TV. But we also need to see on TV, in our news media, the good things that Black folks are doing. There's a lot of great Black men that are doing a great, marvelous thing. There's a lot of great Black women that are doing great things. There are a lot of families that are doing, but we leave those things out. And what's projected is now what gets ratings on TV, to get sponsorships so now we can make money. Charity starts at home and then it's spread abroad.
Yeah, because a lot of it is narrative. I didn't even realize until we started the Elevated Men Project and started doing more research that they say that actually Black men are the most involved fathers. And so, here we are, we have these conversations and we say, have Black men failed? And it's really based off of the media and a mass perception when statistics show us that, maybe that isn't true. Even when it comes to Black women, a lot of times when we look at our music videos, our television shows, they're hypersexual, uneducated, just twerking, man eaters, things like that. But the statistics show that Black women are the most college educated across any racial group, across any gender. And so the narrative is really important. I think that's really a big part of it. So when we talk about this narrative, when we talk about defining family and man, because that's the question that you posed, Mike, like we have to have a real definition. Where are we to gather that definition from? Because as a person in the world, you create your perception based off of the realities around you. And so where we are today, how do we create those definitions?
Well, I could only come from the biblical sense. He that findeth himself a wife findeth himself a good thing and is in favor with the Lord. For this reason, man shall leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. This is now bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. My agenda now when I date or when I see someone or when I'm with someone is to now create a point of, in my mind, I want to be with this woman because God has now put in me the point that this particular person now is the person for me. But it's hard to do that when you have a buffet. And a buffet
wait a minute. So are you saying that when we get with women, we're not thinking about family, we're thinking about something else?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Can I get a witness?
We don't have any intention. So you're saying like when you're at the club, when brothers at the club and they got their Hennessy and the ice and they're doing this, whatever, and they smoking around, they ain't looking for a wife, they ain't looking to start a family. Is that what you're saying?
Come on, bro. Okay.
And so there does come a point of how things start. What was that?
Hennessy makes you talk crooked.
You ain't lying. So now, Lojo, what do you think about that? Like, we're trying to define manhood and family, but we have to make our definitions based on the reality that we live in. And so, what points of information should we be looking at to create those definitions?
Wow. I think that people that are in that current situation, right? I mean, not all of us are married with children. Not all of us are married, and so you can't ask a single dude about what it's like to be married. And I think a lot of people ask that question, right? They be like, "Hey, single guy, what's it like to be married?" They be like, "Man, hey, look, it ain't for everybody, it ain't for everybody." Right. And it's like, well, how do you know you've never been married?
Mm-hmm.
What is it like to be a father? Well, why are you asking a dude with no kids? Because he has no earthly idea what it's like to be a father. And I think that's where, that generational wisdom comes in, right? Us getting it passed down from Brother Patton and then us passing down to our sons, because we've been in those situations before, and so, I think the definition has to come from the people that are in it. I'm not, it can't come from the people that are not in it or have never. I'll say. Never,
so are you saying a woman can't define what a man is?
I'm saying what?
A woman can't define what a man is. A woman can't give us the definition of what it is to be a man. Would you?
Not at all. Not at all. Now she can share the attributes that she would prefer to see in a man, but she can't necessarily say, well, this is what a man should be. I can't even really say that. Yes, I can. I'm gonna rephrase that. I'm gonna stop speaking like I can't when I can.
You can. You got this, bro.
But no, I don't feel like a woman can define a man. The same way I don't feel like a man can define a woman. We are not you. You are not us. Now you could say what you like and what you prefer, but when you start doing that, you'll start to get all kind of things about what a man and a woman should be, because we all have certain things that we prefer, individually and personally, not, what that core definition is. It's just what we prefer, and so no, I don't believe that at all. I think that, and I think practicality is super important. Practicality, and I'll use a phrase that Mike used. Maybe it's being conservative, with our definitions. Maybe we need to be more conservative with our definitions, and not so liberal and it's just whatever. We just gonna throw caution to the wind and make it rain. Maybe we need to conservatively define what that looks like, and break down the specifics within that conservative definition. And
man, I think you said conservative too many times, man. You're gonna trip up the algorithm. Like you said conservative like 3 times in a row, they're gonna cut us off.
And so but no, I think that as we move forward in this journey of elevating men and of leadership and of guidance, because that's essentially what we're saying we are. We are leaders of men, and we want to guide the next generation of men to put them in a better position than we have. We want them to get on our shoulders and us to be able to help them elevate to that next level. I think it is important for us to define our definition, and not only define it, but in action live that definition. Because ultimately we can talk till we blue in the face, but when our actions back up our words, that's what gives it power. And so I think that that's what becomes important. So I think that is definitely something that, within the confines of what we do, we need to start clearly defining what that is to us, and then putting that out into the atmosphere and saying, hey, this is what it is. Because understand this, If we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it.
Control the narrative.
And we take the risk of that being incorrect. And then our boys is out here, just doing this all day, so I think it's important for us to define that and for us to begin to not rewrite, but get reconnected. That's the phrase. Get reconnected with our history and who we are and where did we come from, in order to be able to say, okay, based off of that, this is where we need to go.
Right. Man, here we are at our time. As usual, there's so much more to talk about, so many more angles to come at this from. I've got a ton of notes here, and so the next show, we're definitely going to tackle these. I'm gonna just throw a couple of them out there just so you guys kind of start thinking about it. One of the questions that arose, one, we need to define the family unit. We need to create that definition. We need to create the definition of manhood so that we can control the narrative and have some sort of standard. We mentioned the Black agenda. We all know that that's something that we need to look over. But here's a couple things that I really want us to get into in the future. One, the question, are men failing based off of a standard that no longer exists? That was something that came up earlier in the show. I think that could be a whole show in and of itself, because I do believe there's a lot of confusion based on current times versus previous times. Another thought I had here on my pad, are modern women in competition with the traditional man? And so, is there an element of that, the I don't need a man culture, but if I do get a man, he needs to step up to this level, he needs to meet this criteria, or he isn't a man. We need to have these conversations, and I believe as we do, it will help us create those definitions so that we can control the narrative as men. And so love the conversation as always, my brothers. Before we go, definitely want you to promote you, what you're doing, and leave your last thoughts. And so I'll start with you, Brother Pat.
Well, I just want to thank our host, Brother A.L. Johnson, for allowing me to come on and be a part of this great movement that is productive. I'm personal trainer Mike's Patton. I own Mike's Main Event Personal Training Center. I'm at Active Strength along with Jesse Amos. That's at 1100 East Center in Lee's Century Boulevard, Century Drive in Lee's Summit, Missouri. And, this whole point about our health, wealth, and being wise is so important for our daily lives. Let us do our duty that is best. Leave unto the Lord the rest. God bless you.
Thank you so much. And the Vice President of Elevating Men, Mr. Lojo Speaks, man. What you got going on? Where can people find you? What's your final thoughts?
Yes, my brother, man. Thank you again for just another dynamic conversation. Our ability to just have dialogue and have differences, but be able to find ways to connect, to be able to add value to each other's lives. Number one, because that's the whole point of why we do this. You can catch me on Facebook at Lojo Speaks. You can catch me on Instagram at Lojo Speaks, LOJOSPEAKS. You can also now catch me Lopez Boys Auto Sales. So if you're needing a vehicle to get you to that place of employment that you're trying to go to, definitely look us up. We Lopez Boys Auto Sales at gmail.com. Send us an email, say, hey, this is what I'm looking for. If we don't have it on the lot, we'll go get it on the lot for you to purchase. Definitely and then just stay tapped into Elevating Men. We are on a journey to take back the man and make sure that he's providing the value to his family and that those families are providing value to the community. So please continue to stay tapped in.
Definitely. And of course, I'm A.L. Johnson. Do me a favor. Got a quick ask. I need everyone who's watching this to share the video and have this conversation in your own circle. If the conversation just stays here on this platform, it only has so much effect. And so what we want you to do is share this with your network, but don't just share it. have a conversation, come to some conclusions, and keep following Elevated Men. Come to the shows because these shows are live, they're interactive, and so we want your thoughts and your comments in the comment section. We want to have the conversation when we get off this video. We want to come into the comments and we want to continue on this conversation, because if we never are able to define simple things like what is a family and what is manhood, then what are we really doing? And so, let's do that. The other thing I want you to do is go to YouTube. Go to YouTube because I want you to catch up on the conversations that we've already had, so that you have more of an idea of what our principles are, how we think, what we're moving towards. And so go to Elevating Men at YouTube, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you get notified every time we're going live and we're having these great conversations. Also, put it on your calendar every Friday morning from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. We are on live radio. And so 1590 AM and 106.1 FM in Kansas City. If you're out of the state, you can go to kprt.com and listen to the live stream there. We're trying to grow this thing. We're trying to affect as many men as possible so that in turn we can affect individual households and our communities at large. And so help us in this fight. Share, like, comment. We appreciate all of you. Keep tuning in. We'll be back again because, like I said, the conversation is never done. I got a notebook full of stuff here from all these different shows, and we're going to get to it eventually, I promise you, but we want you to go along this journey with us. And so, again, I'm A.L. Johnson. As far as my business and what I do outside of Elevating Men, I am a life insurance agent, been doing that for the past 12 years. Life insurance is important. It's about planning. If you're a man and you're watching this and you know that you haven't prepared for your family, if something were to happen to you and your family would be in a financial hardship, you need life insurance. And so, don't make it a taboo subject. Just because you purchase life insurance, it doesn't mean anything's going to happen tomorrow, but it's a point of being prepared. And so, I employ each of you. If you do have questions, reach out to me, A.L. Johnson on Facebook. Of course, Elevating Men on Facebook and YouTube. And anything else, guys? Anything else that I missed?
Well, I just want to make sure that I say this. If you all have a health problem or issues with being overweight, or you have a son or a daughter that wants to get into sports, I'm a nutritionist. I've been doing it for over 30 years. I have my own gifts. God has blessed me. I work with the individual. If you're looking for a person now to teach you and show you how to now make your body at its best, come to Mike's Main Event. It's the best. And I'm telling you that it's nothing like getting older and getting better, because it ain't how you start, it's how you finish.
Absolutely. You know what? That's a phrase to end on. It ain't how you start, it's how you finish. And so thank you all for tuning in. Again, share, like, comment. We'll see you again soon.